She traced her fingers along the edge of the desk, feeling the small nick in the wood that had been there for as long as she could remember. 8 years had passed, but Margaret Cooper still found herself wandering into this room on particularly difficult days. The home office of her husband, Special Agent Thomas Cooper, remained largely untouched since that foggy October morning in 1977 when he kissed her goodbye and never returned. The San Francisco field office had called that evening. Thomas hadn't checked in. His car was found abandoned at Muir Woods, keys still in the ignition, his service weapon locked in the glove compartment. No signs of struggle, no blood, no Thomas. Just an empty vehicle and the vast redwood forest that seemed to have swallowed him whole. The official search lasted 3 weeks. The unofficial one, led by his colleagues who refused to give up, stretched to 3 months. Eventually, even they had to admit defeat. The case file remained open, gathering dust alongside hundreds of others, marked with that most dreaded of FBI classifications: missing, presumed dead. "Mom?" a voice called from downstairs. "Are you up there?" "In Dad's office," Margaret replied, her hand still resting on the desk. Emily appeared in the doorway, her 24-year-old face bearing the same strong jawline as her father. She'd been 16 when Thomas disappeared, just beginning to forge her own identity. Now she worked as a journalist for the San Francisco Chronicle, her determination to uncover truths, a trait inherited from both parents. "You know what today is," Emily said softly. Not a question, but a gentle reminder. Margaret nodded. 8 years. The silence between them was comfortable, weathered by time and shared grief. Emily crossed the room and opened the curtains, letting the California sunlight spill across the room. It illuminated the wall of photographs. Thomas at the academy graduation, Thomas holding baby Emily, Thomas and Margaret on their 20th anniversary, just 3 months before he vanished. "I spoke with Uncle Jack yesterday," Emily said, referring to Jack Reynolds, Thomas's former partner at the Bureau. "He's retiring next month." "God, finally," Margaret said with a small smile. "That man has been threatening to retire since before your father disappeared. He wants us to come to the party. Said he has something he needs to give you, something of Dad's." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "After all this time, what could he possibly have that—" The phone rang downstairs, cutting her off mid-sentence. Margaret sighed and moved toward the door, but Emily placed a hand on her arm. "I'll get it. Take your time up here." When Emily was gone, Margaret turned back to the desk. She'd maintained this shrine for 8 years, dusting it weekly, preserving everything exactly as Thomas had left it. His coffee mug still sat beside the blotter, the dried residue of his last cup forming a dark ring at the bottom. His reading glasses rested on top of a case file he'd brought home to review over the weekend. A routine kidnapping case, nothing that should have put him in danger. She opened the top drawer, something she rarely did, and looked at the scattered pens, paper clips, and notepads inside. Thomas had been meticulously organized in his work, but charmingly chaotic in his personal habits. The drawer was a perfect reflection of that contradiction. As she began to slide it closed, something caught her eye, a small key taped to the underside of the drawer. In 8 years of occasional browsing, how had she never noticed it before? Her hands trembled slightly as she detached it and held it up to the light. It wasn't a house key or car key, but something smaller, more delicate, the kind that might open a safety deposit box or a locker. "Mom," Emily's voice carried up the stairs, pitched higher with urgency. "You need to come down here right now." Margaret pocketed the key and hurried downstairs to find Emily standing pale-faced by the phone, the receiver still clutched in her hand. "What is it? What's wrong?" Emily swallowed hard. "That was Uncle Jack. He's at the Marin County Sheriff's Department." She paused, seemingly struggling to form the words. "They found something in an old storage unit in Sausalito. The rental was paid through an offshore account, all automated payments. When the account finally emptied last month, they opened it up." Margaret felt her heart pounding against her ribs. "What did they find?" "Dad's FBI badge," Emily whispered, "and photographs, dozens of them, surveillance photos of Dad, of us, of our house, taken weeks before he disappeared." Her voice cracked. "And a map of Muir Woods with a location marked. They're assembling a team to investigate the site right now." Margaret's fingers closed around the key in her pocket, its edges pressing into her palm. After 8 years of silence, the universe had offered up 2 clues in the span of 10 minutes. She didn't believe in coincidences. Neither had Thomas. "Get your coat," she said, suddenly feeling more awake, more alive than she had in years. "We're going to Marin." Outside, the California sun continued to shine with indifferent brightness, illuminating a day that had suddenly shifted from memorial to mystery. 8 years of stillness had just been shattered, and whatever lay ahead, Margaret knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. The Marin County Sheriff's Department buzzed with an energy that seemed out of place for a case 8 years cold. Margaret and Emily were led through the building by a young deputy who kept stealing glances at them. Curiosity mingled with something that looked uncomfortably like pity. Jack Reynolds waited for them in a small conference room, his once dark hair now completely silver. He embraced Margaret tightly, then held her at arm's length, examining her face. "You look good, Maggie," he said, using the nickname only Thomas and he had ever used. "You're a terrible liar, Jack," she replied with a sad smile. "Always have been." Jack turned to Emily, shaking his head in wonder. "And you. Every time I see you, you look more like your father." The room fell silent as the weight of why they were there settled over them. Jack gestured to the chairs around the table. "You should sit down for this." Margaret remained standing. "I've been sitting for 8 years, Jack. Just show us what you found." Jack nodded to the deputy, who placed a cardboard box on the table and left the room, closing the door behind him. Jack pulled on a pair of latex gloves and carefully removed the lid. "The storage unit was rented under a false name 2 weeks before Thomas disappeared," he explained, lifting out a sealed evidence bag containing a tarnished FBI badge. "Paid in cash initially, then through an offshore account set to make automatic payments. When the account ran dry last month, the owner of the facility waited the required 30 days, then opened it up." Margaret stared at the badge, remembering how proud Thomas had been the day it was issued to him. "That's definitely his." Jack nodded grimly. "The facility manager recognized it as law enforcement identification and called it in." He reached back into the box and removed a manila envelope. "But it's what else was in the unit that concerns me." He slid several photographs across the table. They showed Thomas entering and exiting their home, Thomas picking Emily up from high school, Thomas and Margaret at a restaurant, all clearly taken with a telephoto lens from a distance. "Someone was watching him," Emily whispered, picking up a photo of herself at 16, captured through her bedroom window as she studied at her desk. "Watching all of us." Jack removed another item from the box, a map of Muir Woods, with a red X marked deep in the park, miles from any official trail. "This is what has everyone scrambling," he said. "There's a team assembling right now to check out this location." Margaret felt the key in her pocket, suddenly remembering. "Jack, I found something today too." She placed it on the table. It was taped under a drawer in Thomas's desk. "I've never seen it before." Jack examined the key without touching it. "Safety deposit box," he said immediately. "Not residential, not automotive, banking." "But which bank?" Emily asked. "Dad had accounts at 3 different institutions." 4, Margaret corrected quietly. Both Jack and Emily looked at her in surprise. "There was a 4th bank he used occasionally. He never talked about it much. California Pacific Trust in Sausalito." Jack raised an eyebrow. "That's less than a mile from where the storage unit was found." The conference room door opened and Sheriff David Mercer entered. In his 50s, with a weathered face that spoke of decades in law enforcement, he nodded curtly to Margaret and Emily before addressing Jack. "The team is assembled and ready to move on the Muir Woods location," he said. "We've got cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, the works." Margaret flinched at the word cadaver, but kept her composure. "We're coming with you." The sheriff started to object, but Jack cut him off. "They have every right to be there, Dave, and there's something else." He gestured to the key. "We need to make a stop at California Pacific Trust first. Banks are closed, Jack. It's Sunday. I know the branch manager, Emily interjected. All eyes turned to her. Christina Alvarez, we did a story on local banking last year. I have her number. 30 minutes later, they pulled into the empty parking lot of California Pacific Trust. Christina Alvarez, a sharp-dressed woman in her 40s, waited by the entrance, concern evident on her face. Emily, she greeted. When you called, I almost couldn't believe it. We haven't had a safety deposit box access in this building for nearly 3 years. 3 years? Jack asked. Christina nodded. The bank's been transitioning to digital. We've been phasing out physical storage. Most of our clients transferred their belongings years ago. Inside, Christina led them to a small room in the back, where a wall of safety deposit boxes gleamed under fluorescent lights. Margaret handed over the key, and Christina matched it to box 447. I'll give you privacy, she said, placing the box on a table in a small adjoining room before leaving and closing the door. Margaret stared at the metal container, suddenly afraid of what she might find. Emily placed a hand on her shoulder. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. With a deep breath, Margaret opened the box. Inside lay a single microcassette tape recorder, the kind Thomas often used for dictating notes, and a manila envelope. She removed the envelope first, opening it to find a handwritten letter in Thomas's unmistakable script. Margaret, she read aloud, her voice trembling. If you're reading this, then I've either contacted you about this safety deposit box, or I've been gone long enough that you've found the key I've hidden in my desk. I pray it's the former, but I fear it may be the latter. She paused, composing herself before continuing. What I've discovered goes deeper than I ever imagined. There are people within the Bureau who are compromised. Jack knows who I suspect, but I've kept him at arm's length for his own protection. The Henley case wasn't what it seemed. The kidnapping was a cover for something much worse. Margaret looked up at Jack, whose face had gone pale. The Henley case? That was the file on his desk when he disappeared. Jack nodded slowly. A 7-year-old boy taken from his home in Nob Hill. We found him 3 days later, unharmed. The kidnapper was never caught. Margaret returned to the letter. I've documented everything on the enclosed tape. Names, dates, locations, everything I could verify. I don't know who I can trust anymore, but I know I can trust you. Keep this safe until I return. If I don't come back, her voice broke. If I don't come back, give this to Associate Director Lawrence Mitchell in Washington. No one else. I love you and Emily more than life itself. Thomas. The room fell silent as Margaret picked up the tape recorder with shaking hands. She pressed play, and Thomas's voice filled the room for the first time in 8 years. This is Special Agent Thomas Cooper, San Francisco Field Office, badge number 5372. The date is October 12th. 1977. What follows is my account of corruption within the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specifically regarding the trafficking of classified intelligence to foreign operatives using kidnapping cases as cover. As the tape played on, revealing a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the FBI, Margaret watched Jack's expression shift from shock to grim understanding. By the time Thomas's voice detailed his plan to meet a confidential informant at Muir Woods on October 15, 1977, the day he disappeared, Jack had moved to the door, checking that they were still alone. We need to get to Muir Woods, he said urgently. Right now. And that tape needs to stay with us. Margaret ejected the cassette and slipped it into her pocket alongside the letter. He mentioned Associate Director Mitchell. Is he still at the Bureau? A shadow crossed Jack's face. Lawrence Mitchell was promoted to Deputy Director 3 months after Thomas disappeared. He retired last year. He hesitated. He's the one who officially closed Thomas's case. Margaret felt ice in her veins as the implications became clear. The map, the storage unit, the surveillance photos. This wasn't just about finding Thomas anymore. It was about finding the truth he had died to protect. The convoy of vehicles wound through the narrow roads leading to Muir Woods as the afternoon sun filtered through the towering redwoods. Margaret sat silently in the passenger seat of Jack's car, the microcassette tape secure in her jacket pocket. Emily followed behind them with Sheriff Mercer, while 3 other Sheriff's Department vehicles and a forensics van brought up the rear. "You should prepare yourself," Jack said quietly, breaking the silence that had enveloped them since leaving the bank. "Whatever we find today—" "I've been preparing for 8 years," Margaret replied, her gaze fixed on the endless trees beyond the windshield. "I buried Thomas in my heart a long time ago, even without a body to put in the ground." She turned to look at him. "What I wasn't prepared for was finding out he was betrayed by the very institution he devoted his life to." Jack gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Not everyone at the Bureau was corrupt, Maggie. There were good people, still are. Like you?" The question hung in the air, neither accusation nor absolution. He didn't answer immediately. "I've asked myself every day for 8 years if I could have done more, if I should have seen what Thomas saw." He glanced at her briefly before returning his eyes to the road. "He kept me in the dark to protect me." That's what his voice on the tape said. But protection feels a lot like guilt when you've lost your best friend. They pulled into the park's main lot, now closed to the public and occupied only by the search team vehicles. A park ranger approached as they exited the car. "The coordinates from your map are about 4 miles in," he said, unfolding a detailed trail map across the hood of Jack's car. "There's no established trail to that location, but there's an old maintenance path that gets within half a mile." He traced the route with his finger. "The terrain gets rough after that." Sheriff Mercer joined them, studying the map. "We'll take the maintenance path as far as we can, then proceed on foot. I want teams of 2. No one goes anywhere alone." He looked up at the darkening sky. "We've got about 3 hours of daylight left. Let's move." The group assembled quickly, loading equipment onto ATVs modified for the narrow paths. Margaret found herself riding behind Jack, with Emily and a deputy on another vehicle behind them. The rumble of engines seemed sacrilegious in the cathedral-like quiet of the redwood forest, but urgency outweighed reverence now. The maintenance path narrowed as they progressed, eventually becoming too overgrown for the vehicles. They continued on foot, the forensics team struggling with their equipment over the uneven ground. Sheriff Mercer consulted a GPS device, adjusting their course occasionally. "Less than a quarter mile now," he announced after nearly 40 minutes of hiking. The forest had grown denser, the massive redwoods giving way to a thicker understory of smaller trees and brush. The light took on a greenish quality, filtered through layers of foliage above. The cadaver dogs moved ahead, their handlers keeping them on long leads as they worked through the undergrowth. Suddenly, one of the dogs began to bark insistently, pulling its handler forward with unexpected strength. "Hold positions!" Sheriff Mercer called out, moving quickly toward the dog. "We may have something." Margaret and Emily exchanged glances, then followed despite the order to stay back. Jack stayed close behind them, one hand hovering near the service weapon holstered at his hip. They emerged into a small clearing, perhaps 30 feet across, where the canopy opened slightly to allow direct sunlight to reach the forest floor. The dog was indicating intently at a spot near the base of a massive redwood, its roots creating natural chambers in the earth around it. The handler gently pulled the dog back as the forensics team moved in with their equipment. A technician swept the ground-penetrating radar over the area the dog had indicated, watching the screen carefully. "There's definitely something here," she said after a moment. "About 3 feet down, solid object, roughly 2 feet by 4 feet. Margaret felt Emily's hand slip into hers, squeezing tightly. "Proceed," Sheriff Mercer ordered, and 2 deputies began carefully removing the topsoil with small shovels. The work was painstakingly slow, each layer of earth removed with archaeological precision. As they dug deeper, the tension in the clearing became palpable. Margaret found herself holding her breath, watching as each shovelful of dirt brought them closer to an answer she both craved and dreaded. "I've got something," one of the deputies called out after nearly 20 minutes. He set his shovel aside and knelt, brushing away soil with his gloved hands to reveal a metallic edge. The forensics team moved in again, working with brushes and smaller tools to expose what lay beneath without disturbing potential evidence. Gradually, a metal container came into view, Not a coffin as many had feared, but a waterproof storage case, approximately the size of a footlocker. "It's padlocked," the technician announced, photographing the scene from multiple angles before proceeding. Sheriff Mercer approached with bolt cutters. After documenting the lock's position, he cut through it with a single decisive snap. The technician lifted the lid slowly, cameras clicking rapidly to capture whatever lay inside. Margaret stepped forward, unable to remain at a distance any longer. Jack moved with her, his presence solid and reassuring at her side. Inside the case were dozens of file folders, plastic evidence bags containing what appeared to be audio tapes, similar to the one in Margaret's pocket, and several sealed envelopes. On top of everything lay a bureau-issued service revolver in a clear evidence bag, Thomas's backup weapon, the one not found in his car. But no body, no human remains. "He's not here," Margaret whispered, unsure whether to feel relief or deeper despair at this new mystery. The forensics team began carefully removing and cataloguing the contents. One folder fell open as it was lifted, revealing photographs of men in suits passing envelopes in shadowy parking garages and restaurant corners. Paperclipped to these were typed transcripts of conversations, evidence of the conspiracy Thomas had uncovered. Sheriff Mercer opened one of the sealed envelopes and pulled out a single sheet of paper. His expression changed as he read it, eyes widening slightly before he handed it to Jack. "It's addressed to you," he said quietly. Jack took the paper with visibly trembling hands. "Jack," he read aloud, "if you're reading this, then Margaret found the key and the tape. I'm sorry for keeping you in the dark, but there was no other way. Mitchell and Donovan are involved up to their necks, and I couldn't risk them seeing us together more than normal. By now, I'm either dead or I've gone so deep undercover that I might as well be. The evidence in this cache is everything I could gather. Enough to bring down their entire operation if it reaches the right hands." Jack paused, clearing his throat before continuing. "There's a final meeting scheduled with my informant on November 3rd, 1977, at the Sutro Baths ruins. If I'm still alive, I'll be there. If not, the informant has instructions to contact Margaret directly. His name is Daniel Weiss, former CIA, current private contractor. He can be trusted. Tell Margaret and Emily I love them more than anything in this world. Watch over them for me, brother. Thomas." A heavy silence fell over the clearing as Jack lowered the letter. November 3rd, 1977. A meeting that had happened almost 8 years ago. "Daniel Weiss," Margaret repeated, the name unfamiliar yet suddenly the most important one in her world. "We need to find him." "If he's still alive," Sheriff Mercer said grimly. "Anyone connected to this case seems to have a short life expectancy." Emily, who had been quiet throughout the excavation, suddenly spoke up. "Actually, I know that name." All eyes turned to her. "Daniel Weiss is a security consultant in Washington. I researched him for an article last year on private intelligence firms. He's very much alive." Jack exchanged looks with Sheriff Mercer. "We need to contact him immediately, but securely. This goes beyond a local investigation now." As the forensics team continued processing the cache of evidence, Margaret walked to the edge of the clearing, needing a moment alone. The towering redwoods that had seemed so ominous before now felt protective, guardians of a truth that had waited patiently for 8 years to be discovered. Emily joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "Do you think he could still be alive?" she asked softly. "Dad, I mean?" Margaret considered the question that had haunted her for 8 years, the question she'd finally put to rest in her heart, only to have it resurface today with painful hope. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "But I do know your father would never have abandoned us without an extraordinary reason." She took the microcassette from her pocket, turning it over in her fingers. "And I know we're closer to the truth now than we've ever been." Back at the cache, Jack was helping to catalogue the contents, his FBI training taking over despite his impending retirement. He looked up as Margaret and Emily returned. "There's something else," he said, holding up a small notebook. "Coordinates. Multiple locations across California, Nevada, and Oregon." He flipped through the pages. Dates, times, names. This is a record of every meeting in their trafficking network. Evidence, Margaret said. He was building a case. And now we'll finish it, Emily added with quiet determination. For Dad. As the last of daylight filtered through the redwood canopy, casting long shadows across the clearing, Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced in 8 years. Purpose. The empty desk in Thomas's office would remain empty. The coffee mug would remain unwashed, but they were no longer just memorials to what she had lost. They were reminders of what Thomas had fought for, what he had possibly died for, and what they would now see through to the end. The truth, buried for 8 years in the shadow of ancient redwoods, had finally begun to emerge. And with it, the faintest flicker of something Margaret had long ago surrendered: hope. If you enjoyed this story of mystery, loss, and the relentless pursuit of truth, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. A new video is appearing on your screen right now about another cold case that was solved decades after everyone had given up hope. Until next time, remember that some mysteries aren't meant to stay buried forever. They're just waiting for someone brave enough to uncover them.